Drummers, do you want to learn about some really high-level nutrition and learn how you can take that high-level nutrition and apply it to your world? Today, I'm interviewing Alan Aragon, the author of Flexible Dieting. Alan Aragon is one of the leading nutritional experts in the fitness field, as well as a fitness professional. He's been around for decades. To be honest, I've been in the fitness industry for 19 years, and he's one of the first guys I heard about talking about all this stuff 19 years ago on a website called T Nation, which was a fitness bodybuilding website. Although it was a fitness bodybuilding website, Alan has been doing research, consistently learning more and more and more, and been working with high-level athletes, working with professional athletes, Stone Cold Steve Austin. He's been mentioned on the Joe Rogan podcast. He's been hosted on so many podcasts, I can't even reconcile it. He's a part of research. He's on PubMed, Men's Health. He's a part of bodybuilding.com, NSCA. I mean, really all the high-level science-based fitness accolades that you can find. Alan is a part of it. Alan is someone who's been on one of my podcasts. I have another podcast called the Fitness Pro Mentor Podcast. It's a marketing and fitness podcast for fitness professionals. He's been a part of that, so I've got a connection with him. I've known him for a long time. Really great guy, extremely knowledgeable, extremely in-depth. Truthfully, Alan has offered to come back on the podcast. So if you want to learn more about everything we talk about today, leave comments below about what you want to learn more about. And as soon as I talk to Alan again, I'll reconcile the comments and make sure to ask him. But first, please like and subscribe. Enjoy this episode of the podcast. Alan is a wealth of knowledge. Enjoy. Alan Aragon, welcome to the podcast. Extremely excited to have you here. How is your day going today, sir?
Well, I was up till 5 a.m. working on critiquing a study by Park and colleagues on whey and essential amino acids. So it's a little bit early for me. But you know what, dude? I do this for the love. So we're in. We're in. I'm locked in.
Amazing. Whey and essential amino acids. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Alan, I got to be honest. So this is not our first podcast together. This is the Drum Mechanics podcast. We're talking about drummers. If anyone doesn't know this, I have another podcast called Fitness Pro Mentors, which is geared towards personal trainers and research and exercise science. And that's why I met Alan, and I'm very grateful for this relationship. But one thing that intrigued me about you is, yes, you are a brilliant science-driven person assessing data and constantly assessing research, but you're also a drummer? What?
Yeah, dude. Been drumming my whole life. Been drumming since I was a kid. I was in a band for over 10 years. We played up and down the Sunset Strip in Hollywood. We've headlined the Roxy, the Whiskey. We yeah, just a long history of live playing and some recorded stuff as well. But that was way, way, way back before the internet. That was back in the 90s. Well, the internet did exist, but it barely existed, and there certainly was not any social media to speak of. But yeah,
Even
dude.
even pre
Every once in a while,
MySpace
I
days.
still do play out. Every once in a while. Yeah, it was pre-MySpace.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I love drums, drumming, music in general. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so just one nerdy gear thing. I'm just curious. What is your favorite drum company, and do you have a favorite snare drum? Just curious.
Oh man. Okay. I had a originally had a Gretsch,
Yes.
and then after that I had a Pearl. Um, but I always freaking drooled over Sonar. I would crack open the drum magazines and see some of the big boys with their freaking sonars. I was like, oh my gosh, what a work of art. Um, so yeah, that's what I've had and what I've drooled over.
You know
Oh,
what?
and I love Axis pedals.
Oh
Axis,
yeah.
I don't even. I'm hoping they still even exist, honestly. But holy smokes, man, nothing ever has felt like an Axis pedal.
That's very interesting. Yeah, they're still around creating direct drive pedals, incredible hardware. More metal people are playing them than anyone else, but there are a few guys
Mm,
like Gavin Harris, like incredible rock drummers that are using them. So that's awesome. So loving Sonar drums, played some Gretsch and Axis pedals. Very cool. Well, all the drum
yeah.
nerds will absolutely love all of that.
Sweet.
So, Alan, I've got a series of questions that several drummers on my channels asked me to ask you. I did in the introduction talk a little bit about you, but I was just wondering, for people who don't know you as the now potential nutrition expert for drummers, I'm just wondering, could you share how you got so deep into the evidence-based nutrition world?
Yeah, dude. It originally started off as a kind of a fascination with fitness and bodybuilding. And this, as usual, with young boys, with adolescent boys, it starts when you see bodybuilders on the covers of magazines and you're interested in superheroes and stuff like that. So as an adolescent, I'm like, man, I want to be like these guys on the magazine covers. But then you eventually find out that it takes a a little bit more beyond eating and training right to look that way. And then you discover that you eventually discover that there's a scientific element to changing and optimizing body composition. And so once I learned that there's a science to this, I still had that intense interest in and this fascination with fitness and health and strength and aesthetics. It's at that point that I decided, okay, I'm gonna learn the science of this and see if I can achieve some of it. And oh, wait a minute, you can have a career in fitness too. You can train people. Oh, this is really interesting. So this was back in the 80s and 90s when personal training barely existed. So when I found out that was a thing that people were making a living off of, helping people get in shape while strutting around being in shape, I'm like, yep, this is my zone. Let's go for it. So, in it wasn't until I want to say 2000, the early 2000s, when I finished my master's degree in nutrition, that I really started getting interested in the research aspect of it. Um, and so I just started my research review in 2008. I was like, 16 years ago or something like that. And then in 2011, I met up with Brad Schoenfeld,
Oh
who's
yes.
one of the big researchers now in the strength conditioning side of things. And so the way that I met him was I messaged him on the bodybuilding.com forums and asked him if it's cool if I reviewed one of his papers for my monthly research review, which I had started at the time just a few years prior to 2011. And so that was the beginning of a relationship that took me deep into the research world because Brad became a full-time principal investigator and professor. And while I remained kind of this sort of satellite within the research community, um, who provided education to, I was sort of the bridge, the conduit between the academic world and the actual real world and the trenches. And so I've maintained that relationship with the academic world as sort of the information or education bridge since that time. And so that's where I'm at right now. And the evidence-based movement in the fitness industry, I want to say it's about like 15-ish years old. And I was one of the guys who started it. So there you go.
So I've been a fitness professional for almost 19 years, and as soon as I started learning anything outside of my basic education, you were one of the first names I was introduced to on tnation.com for sure. You, Nick was there, and there was a
Awesome.
few others that were like hands down like the OGs, I'd say. And it's just really wonderful to see you go from, that small bodybuilding forum selling supplements and all that to now having your own book and a huge platform. So, I mean, just before we jump into this even more, congratulations to everything you've gone through and all the great work. Thank you so much for all of it.
Well, it's great to see you killing it with the education and with the podcast stuff. I think you're amazing at it, Brandon.
Ketogenic dieting. Should they have carbohydrates? I know where you stand on this, but I'd love for you to talk about this kind of stuff. Yeah, ketogenic was extremely popular for a few years. Super high
Mm.
fats. A conversation around the health around having carbohydrates has become more popular. If someone is just looking to be an average healthy person, is there a quote unquote staple diet that people can find that they should follow? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer, if the listeners can wrap their heads around this one, it's whatever type of diet that you personally like. that you enjoy and prefer and gravitate towards. The only stipulation with that is that you're consuming enough calories and you're consuming enough protein for the goal. Like, I don't care, and frankly, it doesn't matter if you're a high fat, low carb guy to the degree of being ketogenic, or whether you are a high carb, low fat guy. It just doesn't really matter beyond what your personal preferences are. Now, there are certain extremes with going too low in dietary fat to the point where you can compromise testosterone production if you're somebody who's not on exogenous testosterone or testosterone replacement injections. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing very low fat diets that go below roughly 20-ish% of total calories from fat. Um, but yeah, it honestly it won't make any dang difference. You just have to go with what you prefer and what you can stick to. And it's also important to know that there's nothing particularly special about ketogenic diets beyond their simplicity of the rule set that's required to follow. But the caveat with keto, as simple and elegant as it may be, is that the majority of the general population who hops on it cannot sustain it in the long term. They always end up doubling and tripling their original targeted keto level carbohydrate intake by like 6 to 12 months in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing to do. I mean, if you're not going to have any form of carbohydrates whatsoever, I mean, mainstream, the Western world, at least, you can't really go on I mean, you can't go on an airplane without getting carbohydrates delivered to you in two or three forms if you get a little prepackaged meal. I mean, it's a part of things.
That's right.
So if you have someone per se, like if we're talking about a musician, right? Because there's musicians and they are definitely not in the same caliber of fitness that you and I have been exposed to for all of our careers. If someone is just looking to get started right there, don't want to go super deep into the evidence-based world, which I hope you and I do a little bit. They don't want to go super deep into it, but they do want to start to reorganize their composition, lose a little bit of body fat, maybe not even for cosmetic reasons, but just to be healthier. In your opinion, where's the best place to start?
Best place to start is just having the a small handful of principles in mind. So I would reiterate that: get enough calories and protein for the goal. Um, Getting enough protein can be as easy as getting right around a gram per pound of ideal body weight or goal body weight. That amount of protein scares some academics because A, they don't even lift, and B, they don't even work with a lot of people. But the guys that do lift and do work with a lot of clients will recognize that the value and the effectiveness of in quotes highballing protein. And as far as the concept, I'm going to sorry about this diversion here. The concept that too much protein is bad for you, that's another thing. That's like saying that like oxygen is bad for you. Be careful. You get too much of that stuff. Ooh, you could die. But there it's just practically prohibitive in an economic sense, in a satiety sense, and in a lot of everything sense to worry about getting too much protein. I mean, nobody's sitting around like eating just gobs of flesh and then consuming protein shakes in between their meat dishes. So get protein right, which is technically, if we were to cite the literature, it's about 0.7 grams per pound of body weight, which is the sweet spot. So for the international guys out there, 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight is the sweet spot. And if you go all the way up to 2.2 grams per kilogram or 1 gram per pound, that's perfectly fine. Um, of course, a little caveat there for those of you in the audience who have chronic kidney disease, then you might want to stay around half a gram per pound at most. Okay, so but that's a very fringe population, and even for that population, there is a health trade-off If you're going to lowball protein for your kidneys, then you're also walking the line of sarcopenia down the line as you age. So there's some unfortunate trade-offs there. Getting enough total calories, that's a highly individual thing. So if you're maintaining the kind of body composition that you want, then you're eating enough calories, and it can be as simple as that. If you have excess body fat, then you do need to be eating less. If you're trying to gain, then you need to be eating more calories. So there's a whole art and science to how to set that up and how to make adjustments along the way. So protein, calories, and then food selection. Food selection from just a high level conceptual view is to eat mostly whole and minimally refined slash processed foods. Um, I have to admit that, when the paleo movement was big 10, 15 years ago, they got a lot of things right until they started saying, oh, you got to kick out dairy and legumes. It's like, why and why? And where's the science behind this silly kick out the legumes, kick out the dairy thing? But they got it right in the sense that they really encouraged people to minimize the processed, packaged, highly refined, hyper palatable, energy dense, easily overeaten snack foods and desserts. And so if you can maintain the full range of food groups and a diversity of foods within the groups that are mostly whole and minimally processed, then you're doing most of what you can for good health. So enough protein, enough calories, and good food selection. And then you can live a ripe, long life and
Protein.
be healthy and be fit.
So, Alan, protein, calories, and then food selection. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about sarcopenia. So, anyone that's not really familiar with that, that is muscular atrophy, typically, and it's typically associated as we get older. And I'm sure as we're talking about this, I mean, most of my audience, being drummers, will not know that. But I do want to ask you something because you associated protein. I mean, I'm very, very interesting that protein is your number one thing, and I love that it's up there. And then you related protein consumption to breathing air. And so there's definitely a bias around general populations around protein being associated with bodybuilding and fitness, and then also being associated with high risks of heart disease and cancer. I was just kind of wondering if you could if you would be open to it, to demystifying protein at all.
Yeah. The with protein and disease, it does kind of come down to food selection because there are low quality proteins and suboptimal choices for protein. And the suboptimal choices would be um, well, high quality sources that happen to be fried and deep fried. That's what one of them. And then the other suboptimal choice would be processed meats as a protein source, like spam, salami, bologna, most sausages, uh, corned beef, fatty burgers. And then on the other side of the double-edged sword here, you've got the healthy sources of protein, which are fresh sources, non-processed meats, fish, poultry, and even things like eggs, dairy, and protein powders are high quality, healthy sources of protein. I know that there are people who will fight me out there on the egg issue, but I wouldn't point to eggs as being one of the crucial killers of humanity at the present time. So yeah, that's food selection as far as protein goes. And when we talk about foods or choosing foods that are minimally refined, minimally processed, an exception there is protein powder. So protein powder, as the some classification systems go, it's listed under the ultra processed foods, but it happens to be a highly processed food that produces unanimously positive health outcomes and unanimously favorable body composition outcomes consistently in the scientific literature. So we have to make an exception for protein powder when we talk about avoiding or minimizing processed foods.
So if you're taking a musician drummer and they're looking to triage, right? Because most of these guys, I mean, they're going to listen to this podcast, but they're going to want like the simplest Cole's notes. If they go, listen, I'm going to have more protein. Brandon and Alan says we need to have more protein. If they're going to triage one, should they be triaging animal-based protein or protein powders? And they go the protein powders route, whether it's whey, beef collagen, whatever it may be. Are there negative effects if they make that their primary protein consumption?
The short answer would be no. Um, Whey protein, the bulk of the literature only shows good stuff from it. I mean, if you dig deep enough, you can find some papers where people are critical of whey protein for uh, subtly changing the composition of the gut microbiome in this one particular population. But you can also find literature showing benefits on gut health from whey protein. And so most protein powders out there are going to benefit the users from a health as well as a body composition standpoint. Just as a general principle, I wouldn't consume protein powder as or any single protein source. Um, I I would go for a kind of a diversity or a mix of protein sources, at least three main ones through the course of the day. And the reason for doing that and not sticking, like, let's say, just with protein powder or just with, let's say, beef or just fish is you want to be able to broaden your spectrum of micronutrition as well. So those are all high quality protein sources, but sticking with just one kind predominantly, even though some people are kind of cornered into that, you're just not necessarily optimizing the full spectrum of nutrients you could be consuming. So I would cut off my protein powder intake at perhaps a maximum of roughly a third of my total daily protein.
Burr down. Thank you so much. Last little cheesy protein one, then I want to get to more specific questions. Is red meat bad? And if it is not, can someone have it every single day?
Yeah, the short answer to is red meat bad is no. That's the short oversimplistic answer. The more nuanced answer to it is that it can be contributory to cardiovascular disease if you choose cuts of red meat that are fatty. I mean, red meat can be a source of saturated fat, and it can be a source of factors that over time can accumulate and raise cardiovascular risk. There's a whole faction of people who want to dismiss that and who want to dismiss the the near reality that adverse changes in blood lipids over time can be a bad thing. The nearly undisputed reality that is. But the fact of the matter is, even the major health organizations recognize that there is a point or a threshold dose that's essentially biologically neutral for even red meat. So roughly by weight, about 70 grams a day or 2.5 ounces a day of red meat. Even the major persnickety health organizations will say that's fine, that's biologically neutral. So by the end of the week, you can have roughly a pound, a little over a pound of red meat, of 500 grams by the end of the week. Not 500 grams of protein, but 500 grams by weight of red meat, like 2.5 ounces a day, about 17-ish, 17 and a half, 18 ounces of red meat per week and still be fine. Now, with that said, if there is a guy out there who's eating, let's imagine, okay, let's be hypothetical here, 8 to 12 ounces of red meat a day, but it's lean and it's fresh red meat a day, and the rest of his diet is in quotes healthy. He's consuming vegetables, fruits, and he's getting his 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day. He's physically active. He's maintaining a lean, muscular body composition. I don't see that guy being any grave danger from his red meat intake, honestly, and especially if that red meat is mixed in with other healthy protein sources. If it's mixed in with some marine protein sources as well, because the general population, they don't get enough omega-3 fatty acids. And so the couple ways to do that is to eat fatty fish or to supplement with fish oil. So,
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alan. So you're a drummer.
dude, I so get it's so hard to give like a quick,
I know. Hey,
concise answer.
I want to be clear. Being a science guy, I understand what I'm doing to you. I'm trying, and I'm trying. I'm just throwing these out there because I want to see where you go. Because if they're broad open ended, I want to see the natural flow of Alan. I love your thought process. So I really appreciate
Okay,
what you're
cool.
doing here. So, being a drummer, you understand, especially as someone who had gigged before and also had some
Mhm.
studio pressure, you understand kind of the red light syndrome and then the emphasis of physicality that you have. Like, I don't know the length of gigs, but you play a 45-minute set or you're playing a 3-hour set in Hollywood. Like, that's a long time to play. One of the questions we had, and this may be just your opinion rather than an evidence based per se, but who knows? I mean, in your opinion, for someone who has to optimally perform for anywhere between an hour and 3 hours, physically and also maintain focus, do you have any suggestions around what types of meals and or liquids they should have, broadly speaking, of course?
Yeah, the rules for fueling a drumming session are really no different than the rules for fueling something for fueling exercise that's of moderate intensity to low intensity, depending on the type of depending on the genre. I mean, I do understand that there could be some Arch Spire fans in the audience, or some, some some drummers out there who have extreme physical demands. Um, but generally speaking, drumming is going to burn for the average person not much more than 200 to 300 calories an hour on the top end. I mean, there are could be some larger guys playing physically demanding genres who could burn conceivably 400 to 600 calories an hour.
So Art
But it,
Cruz, sorry, Art Cruz of Lamb of God, someone
oh God,
hooked him up to sensors, yeah, and he played an hour long set and he burned, I think it was
Mhm.
930 calories in just under an
Damn,
hour. Yeah, but if you watch, I
damn.
mean, I don't know if you know that he's a new guy. He smashes, like he's assaulting the drums for an hour.
Oh, absolutely,
200 to
absolutely.
1,000 calories per hour. You can see.
I honestly, I'm bummed that Steve Adler, like fell out, but you know, Art is that his name? Art
Oh,
Cruz, the new
oh,
guy?
Chris Adler, you mean? And yeah, yeah,
Oh,
Art,
Chris Adler. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
bummed that Chris Adler fell out. And the new guy's name, what's his name?
Art Cruz.
Art Cruz.
He's
Yeah,
incredible.
I think he's done a great job replacing Sir Adler.
Yes.
So yeah, that is an amazing thing, and I believe it. Definitely sounds plausible. So for metal drummers and speed metal, death metal type extreme metal drummers, yeah, you know what? We'll probably have to have a different conversation of their fueling needs. But so if we split it up into, let's say, two groups. So the low to moderate intensity guys burning 200 to 300 calories per hour of drumming, and then the higher intensity guys kind of doubling that up. Um, as long as if you're in a fed state when you're drumming, meaning you've consumed a moderate to even a large size meal within 3 hours of starting the gig, then per the literature, you wouldn't benefit from intra session fueling unless you were drumming for 70 to 90 minutes. So if it is like significantly less than an hour or like an hour at most, if you're in a fed state, you won't necessarily benefit from, for example, consuming an intra-workout carbohydrate electrolyte beverage. But if you are exceeding an hour and certainly approaching the 70 to 90-minute mark and beyond, then even if you're drumming in a fed state, let's say having had a meal within 2 to 4 hours of starting the gig, then you could benefit from kind of a standard intra session fueling protocol, which would be anywhere from 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate in a 4 to 8% solution per hour. And Gatorade has figured this out, quite a while ago. And so has all the rest of the literature. We found that it's about 30 to 60 grams per hour of carbohydrate that would be appropriate for that. In certain high heat conditions and high sweating conditions, it is possible to benefit from as much as about 80-ish grams of carbohydrate per hour. But that's pretty rare. I mean, you'd have to be out there in the sun doing speed metal the whole time. So typical like 20-ounce bottle of sports beverage like Gatorade, it's going to get you 30, 40 grams of carbs. So if that is consumed every 30 to 60 minutes, then you'll be more than fueled for the session, kind of no matter how long the session is. But once again, going back to the idea that the duration of the session really sort of determines if you're in the fed state, if it's significantly like if it's within an hour, then you won't necessarily benefit. If the session happens like first thing in the morning and you have no time and no room to get a pre-exercise meal in or a pre-drumming meal in there, which is kind of rare. These things usually happen in the evening. Then you would immediately institute a 30 to 60 gram per hour intra-session carbohydrate intake in order to stay fueled and stay hydrated.
Now, on the qualification you made, I just want to clarify where you said that if there was a lower intensity, no intra performance drink would be required, and higher intensity there would be. The reason why you say that is because at the lower intensity, we wouldn't be depleting any substrates that would really require us to refuel. Therefore, whatever we've got would be adequate for the 200 to 300 calories we'd be burning, given the duration and the temperature was adequate. Is that right?
Yeah. That's a good point you raised, dude. The lower intensity stuff, the mellow genres, you know, um, like if you can kind of picture some of the low and slow stuff, easy listening, it's just not demanding from an energetic standpoint, from a glycolytic standpoint, and a lot of times people can just get away with fasting, being fasted through that kind of work. But anytime you're talking moderate to higher intensity stuff, it's at that point that intra-session fueling would become a factor.
Very interesting. Definitely have never talked about that, and I think that's a very cool idea. Do you think if someone's going to have a meal prior to the drumming, let's say somewhere it's the mid-level intensity, should they, do you have any thoughts around triaging like a protein fat style meal to optimize cognitive performance, and then post performance having like a protein carbohydrate start meal to help replenish and support recovery? If someone was going to choose like a again, this is like we're talking about exercise, but we're talking about like a specific form. So it's like could be a low aerobic exercise or moderate, VO2 max style with 3-minute intervals, 10 to 15 times. If we're thinking about that, is there any specific styles of meals that you kind of recommend for a general demographic to consider, or is it coming back to the whatever works for you?
Yeah, it's going to come back to the bigger picture. What are the person's, because performance wise, these things aren't going to be a major factor unless somebody is drumming for over an hour for a gig, like towards the 2 hour mark and beyond.
Right.
It just won't be a factor because what would become a factor is if glycogen levels start dipping in the working muscles. And it's at that point where carbohydrate really kind of becomes the issue. So basically it's sort of like whatever the person prefers. I would say, you don't necessarily want to go into a gig hungry and irritable. So if you've had a typical mixed meal, mixed macronutrient meal, protein, carbohydrate, fat, to your preference with I always default to protein per meal being optimized at somewhere between 30 to 60 grams. Depending on who you are and what your physical goals are. It's going to fall right around 30 to 60 grams per meal.
Interesting.
And carbohydrate and fat, whatever your personal preference is. If that meal is consumed, I want to say within 2 to 3 hours prior to starting, then it won't be sitting in your stomach. And that way you have the option to just hydrate throughout the gig with water, or if that gig is going to go into the 90 minutes, 120 minutes, then I would hydrate with a sports beverage,
Perfect.
consuming that 30 to 60 grams an hour, depending on how intense and demanding the music is.
So, like you, definitely not the same caliber. I mean, I've done a lot of public speaking, lecturing, teaching, as well as drumming. And I'd say, like, from my own personal experience, if I eat a large meal too close to performing, be it speaking and talking about a very deep subject or drumming, I notice like a cognitive performance change where I just don't feel as focused. It's harder for me to articulate. It just doesn't feel the same versus if I have it 2 or 3 hours out. And same idea where I've experimented with fasting. I know some people talk about like this, they feel cognitively enlightened. And I, I didn't have that experience. Like it was very much like this moderate sized meal, 2 to 3 hours before, allowing time for digestion and getting that into my system. Not too much, not fasted, but making sure my body had what it needed. Does that sound crazy?
Well, you know what happens with the guys who report positive stuff from the fasting model is it usually comes from the caffeine they consume.
This is true.
So, it's very typical for people to engage in those models to consume either coffee or tea or even just straight dose with some sort of caffeine containing product. And caffeine will have that ergogenic and mood and focus boosting effect. It's not necessarily the idea that they're fasted per se. I would say for the majority of cases, it'll come from the caffeine. And then you will just have some people who prefer to be fasted and feel better when they're fasted. And I say go for it, but don't neglect fluid intake during the activity, whatever the activity is. And with things like drumming, which can run the gamut from lower to higher intensities, then total fluid intake, if you can consume, roughly a liter per hour, half a liter to a full liter per hour of fluid, then that's kind of right around what you need to be consuming to maintain hydration.
You said one thing I have to ask. I'll be remiss if I don't ask because I know my audience will ask. There are a lot of people who we've heard and regarded that for protein consumption, you spoke about 20 to 60 grams per sitting. And there's this kind
Mhm.
of like wording, this thought around like 30 to 35 grams in a sitting, and your body can't absorb much more to that. Could you speak to that and help dispose that myth? Because this is not my wheelhouse.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so there was an old myth that um kind of floated around through the 80s and 90s and even a bunch of the 2000s that there was this limit to the amount of protein the body can use in a single sitting. Well, over the course of the decades, we found out that that's just not true. Like, for example, if you require, let's say 150 grams of protein in a day, then you can just sit there and eat that 150 grams of protein in a single sitting, and the body will just handle that bolus of substrate of food and take as long as it needs to digest it. It'll just spend the whole day digesting. It's almost like, for those of you who've had pet snakes, but it's obviously it's not this extreme.
I did.
But when oh, you did, okay,
I
cool.
did.
So when a snake has food, you probably fed it a nice big rat or something. Um, it utilizes the basically the entire animal that it consumed. And that's kind of the same thing with humans. If you have a large amount of protein, your body will take a longer time to digest and absorb. If you have a smaller amount of protein, your body will handle it a lot quicker. And so it's just a mythical thing to think that our body cannot process beyond X amount of protein. And the numbers that were thrown around for a while were like 25 or 35, right around the 30-ish gram mark. And that is a total myth. Now, what isn't a myth is what is the ceiling of a phenomenon called muscle protein synthesis. So there is a dosing ceiling for muscle protein synthesis, and that is somewhere between the 30, 40, possibly 50 gram mark. Is the body will hit a plateau in muscle protein synthesis. And that makes sense because our bodies have a limit to the amount of growth response it can have to nutrients. I mean, it's not like we can just eat bigger and bigger meals and just become the Hulk in a week, you know. So I know, so that is true. There is an anabolic ceiling to protein dosing, and it is around probably 30 to 50 grams. And that's because there's a limit to how much muscle growth can happen per day or per week or per month. And when you consider that most adult men have a muscle gain capacity of somewhere between 20 to 40 pounds in adult life, like as an ultimate muscular potential, if you're lucky, 20 to 40 pounds above and beyond an untrained adult male. When you break that down per year, it's pretty minuscule. You know, if you were to dedicate, for example, a 5 to 10 year period to training and putting on muscle mass, you're looking at like what, 5 pounds a year, 8 pounds a year, if that, 4 to 8 pounds a year. And so you can't force muscle growth by just forcing sort of this overfeeding of protein. But at the same time, if you want to eat your 150, 200 grams of protein in one sitting, you'll use all of it. You just won't be maxing out muscle protein synthesis to a degree of frequency that maximizes muscle growth. So if we were to look at a model where our goal was to grow muscle as quickly as possible, we wouldn't want to have like one or two meals a day that encompass our entire daily protein need. We would want to have the doses that maximize muscle protein synthesis and repeat those doses as often as possible through the day, through the week, and so on. And so, if it was indeed somebody's goal to gain muscle as quickly as possible, then they would want to do multiple meals a day to make that happen, to maximize muscle protein synthesis. So there's a couple of nuances and rabbit holes there, but like the main point I want to get across is your body uses the protein that you consume for various metabolic fates. It doesn't just automatically just start oxidizing or leaking out of your ears or anything like that. It just won't necessarily be shunted towards the pathway of growing muscle. So I don't know. I could go more into that, but I feel like I could potentially confuse the issue.
Oh, no, no, this is all perfect. I appreciate it. I got two more questions. I want to honor your time, but I got two more questions I want to make sure I get in. And one thing that I talk to a lot of my audience about is being recognizing that drummers is a physical form of activity. Like there is a component of this that you're using skeletal muscle, and that if you want to make sure, one of the biggest problems we see right now is aging drummers having major injuries that limit their performance, right? You see on neoperts and many other people that have body issues that stop them. So I talk about developing skeletal muscle off the drum set and on the drum set in kind of different ways. And one of the questions that comes up often that I'm excited to ask you is, in your opinion, what are some basic foods to help with recovery of skeletal muscle? I'm sure it's a very simple fitness question, but if we're developing skeletal muscle and potentially some sort of hypertrophy sense on the gym floor per se, and then we transfer to the drum set and we're working on more aerobic, anaerobic style things here or more endurance-based activities, what are some go-to healthy meals or options to help optimize skeletal muscle recovery besides 150 grams of protein like a rat?
Yeah, dude. It's a matter of covering macronutrition and micronutrition. So covering essential macronutrition and essential micronutrition is basically achieving a well-constructed, well in quotes, balanced diet. And the art and science to that is kind of complex, but a lot of it honestly does boil down to get enough protein and calories and make sure your food selection is good. And when I say good food selection, you have to recognize that there are various food groups that contain foods that are separated into food groups due to their inherent nutrition. So due to the uniqueness of the nutrition within the food group. And so way back in the day, there was the four food groups, but it's been split up more into about six-ish. So you're looking at the protein foods, meats, meat, fish, poultry, protein powder, eggs, certain dairy stuff. And then there's fats, healthy fats. People need to understand that it's important to get healthy sources of dietary fat in the diet, like, for example, avocados, olive oil, sesame oil, nuts. Um, there's a seed oil scare going on right now that's completely unfounded, and it really kind of bothers me that people get so passionate about something so unscientific. And the funny thing about the seed oil scaremongering conversation is that when you engage with somebody, or you try to, somebody who has read on the internet that seed oils are bad for you, the way the conversation goes is like this. You ask them, okay, what seed oil is the worst? What seed oil concerns you the most? And what human research would you cite in support of that view? And then the conversation magically just ends right there. They have no idea what the they're talking.
I
So
don't know anything
anyway.
about the seed oil scare. I don't know anything about it, but it sounds ridiculous. So I'm just not even going to worry about it. I appreciate you bringing it up, though. Anyone, don't be worried about seed oil.
And I'm sorry if this is like a PG-13 podcast, but I'm just really sort of passionate about that. And
I
so
think I
the
get away with one or two swears. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
so
Um,
you'll
yeah,
have to bleep that out. And then people if they want to optimize health, want to optimize recovery, then there are things they would want to do, like consume fruits and vegetables. I
yeah.
mean, those things are rich in micronutrition and sparse in quotes empty calories, and um, just that consume the gamut of food groups: meats, fats, fibers, vegetables, the starches. Under the umbrella of starches, you've got whole grains, tubers, or root vegetables, and legumes like beans, peas, those things that get scaremongered by various quacks. And the dairy group. I'm I'm a fan of dairy. And why am I a fan of dairy? Because science is on the side of dairy. I'm not telling people to consume milkshakes and stuff all the time, but milk, yogurt, cheese, yeah, thumbs up. And fruit. So those are the food groups. And with fruit, it's not like I want people to be chugging down a bunch of fruit juice necessarily, but fresh fruit. And so if you cover that spectrum of foods and food groups, then you will get the health, you will get the recovery that you need. You will, if you hit those that targeted grams of protein, which is somewhere between zero point 0.7 to 1.0 grams per pound of goal body weight or ideal body weight, and your total calories are either maintaining a good body composition or marching you towards a good body composition, then you're doing all you can to fuel yourself and recover and be healthy and perform well. Um, there are various aspects to this that really need much more in-depth discussion because kind of giving an overview like that gives you really nothing more than an overview, but hopefully that's a little bit useful.
Very useful. Alan, I got one last question I want to ask you, and then I'll let you get back
Sure,
to your
man.
very busy day. This is a weird one, but I do like talking to my people about neuroplasticity in kind of variety of different ways. And I keep talking about it's a long story. The question I got asked from one of my people is how can nutrition affect and I'm gonna modify it. How can nutrition optimize neuroplasticity?
Okay, so anytime you're talking about neurological health, maybe the most consistent dietary factor that could benefit it from everything from cognitive function to just various aspects of nervous system function are getting the right amount of or getting enough omega-3 fatty acids in the diet. And this is something that is missing in the Western world. Like people don't consume enough marine sourced fats. And while it is possible to get omega-3 fats from plant sources, you'll get the plant form of omega-3, alpha linolenic acid from things like walnuts and chia seeds and flax seeds. You won't necessarily be getting enough of what you're trying to get out of those fats conversion wise, which is EPA and DHA. And you either need as a if you're avoiding fish and fatty fish and stuff, you would need to get that from algae source, algal oil if you're a vegan. And for the non-vegans out there, then you just need to be consuming more fatty fish or supplementing with fish oil. There is a little bit of a caveat there where the researchers are getting their panties slightly bunched up by the prospect of increasing risk for atrial fibrillation from fish oil when consumed in large amounts. But that is kind of an observational data thing that's still controversial. And on balance, it's still going to be a good thing for cardiovascular health to supplement with fish oil if you just don't eat fatty fish ever. So I think that just from a neurological standpoint, I would say try to eat fatty fish 2 to 3 times a week at least. And if you can't do that or are unwilling to do that, then I would supplement with anywhere from a gram to all the way to 3 grams a day of fish oil.
I'm excited you said that because I've got a massive order of salmon sashimi I'm going to be picking up in 90 minutes to take home for dinner. So I'm really excited that you said that. I'm going to be making sure my cognitive function is on cloud nine.
That's what I'm talking about, man.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Drummer Alan Aragon, thank you so much for your time, man. I mean, honestly, this was extremely insightful. I know we covered a variety of topics. If I've got a general audience, right, I've got people who are not as nerdy as some of the people that follow you, which is very, very cool. But if people want to learn more about you and some of the things you're up to, where's the best place that they can look? And what are you most excited about that you're doing right now?
All right. So you can find me and my work at alanaragon.com. And my largest platform is Instagram. I did write a book 2 years ago called Flexible Dieting. There you go. Yeah, and Brandon has the book. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And there's basically everything you need to know about evidence-based nutrition in that book. And for those of you who want to stay like kind of up to the minute with the nutrition research, I do a sort of a technical journal. Like it's a monthly research review, a subscription-based monthly research review, and that's what keeps me busy month to month. Um, oh, and ever since January, I was hired as the chief science officer for the Nutritional Coaching Institute. So I want to give
Dude,
the NCI a big shout out. So what we're doing is we're just going through their nutrition coaching certification courses, and I'm just kind of remodeling them to my standard. And that's going to be a years long process. But NCI, I'm super thankful that they see the value in getting that level of peer review and hiring me on to get that job done. So big shout out to NCI as well.
congratulations on that, by the way. That's a huge opportunity.
Oh yeah, I love it. Good, great group of people.
Amazing. Well, Alan, again, thank you so much for your time. I have to say, your flexible dieting book actually changed my opinion. I was very keto for a long time, and that sounds super lame, but I just went down that wormhole. And a lot of stuff you talk about in here actually helped me reintroduce carbohydrates into my diet. And it completely changed a lot. I know it sounds like a simple thing, but you helped me to demystify some simple things. And every time I talk to you, I always learn something new. So thank you so much. And I'm really excited about knowing that I can have 150 grams of protein, and it's not going to be optimal, but it's going to be great.
You'll be just fine, dude. You'll be just fine. And yeah, thank you so much, Brandon, for everything you're doing. And I think it's just really cool that you're serving this particular community that it's dear to my heart and my own history. And it's just really cool to see the work that you're doing in this area.
Honestly, I really believe stronger musicians, stronger drummers play longer. And I'm just really, really excited to be able to talk to great people like you. So, Alan, thank you so much, man. Have a great day.
You got it, brother.